What is a mind? That's what we're going to be looking at in this short lecture. So we're going to be talking about dualism in our topic on metaphysics of mind. So when we're talking about a mind, what we're talking about is essentially consciousness. So mind and consciousness are going to mean the same thing for the purpose of this topic. Metaphysics, on the other hand, means beyond physics. So when we're speaking about the metaphysics of mind, what we're speaking about is things that might just go beyond the physical. Physical things are what appears to us in the world, like matter. We can all see matter. It abides by physical laws. So the topic of metaphysics is seeing what might lie beyond mere matter. So we need to understand these terms to start with in metaphysics. So within all the possible things that there could be in the world, we have what is actually the case. So this is all the stuff that is actually the case in our world, which is here and now. But then we've got what's physically possible. So there might be things that are not actual in our world, but they're at least physically possible. And then outside of that, we have things that may not be physically possible, but they're at least logically possible. And that's where metaphysics lies, in this box of logical possibilities. So we can see how it includes quite a lot of what could be possible. And anything that falls outside of logical possibility is impossible stuff. So we don't really care about that. If it's a logical contradiction, if it's logically impossible, it's not metaphysically possible either. And we should think that we cannot actually conceive of impossible stuff. So an example of this is, it's probably actually true, it's actually possible for me to fly to Sydney in Australia in 15 hours. Let's say that's actually possible. It might be physically possible for me to fly to Australia, in Sydney, Australia, in 1 hour. It's not actually possible, but it might be physically possible to do that. It could be logically possible, or is logically possible, for me to be here now and then in Sydney, Australia, in less than a second. But we might say that that's not physically possible. But it's at least logically possible, because it's not a logical contradiction to say that I'm here at one time and then at another later time, no matter how short that time is, can be in another place. There's no logical contradiction there. So that at least fits into this box of logical possibility, or a metaphysical possibility. So that's just something we need to be aware of when we're talking about metaphysics. So the metaphysics of mind, we need to be aware of two different kinds of definitions. These are really important definitions. The first one is qualia. Qualia are the private, ineffable qualities of your conscious experience. It's the phenomena of your conscious experience. So when you're having your conscious experience now, the qualia of that conscious experience is what it's like for you to be experiencing things like the smell in the room. It smells quite nice, to be fair. It smells all right. Or the colour of pink, or the colour of green. That conscious experience that you're having, the what it's like for you to see green, is qualia. Another example of this is if you was to ask me, what does coffee taste like? I could give you loads of different descriptions. It's bitter, it's this, it's that. Okay? But that doesn't really help you to understand the taste of coffee, short of you actually having to just go and taste coffee for yourself. So you might ask, what does coffee taste like? And the only thing I can really reply is, I can't really tell you, just got to go and taste it, and then you'll know for yourself. So when you actually have that first taste of coffee, that's you having your qualia. That's you coming into contact with qualia for the first time. The what is it like to smell a rose, to see the colour red, or to taste coffee, that no one else can really get at. I can't, as it were, go into your conscious mind to see what coffee tastes like to you. Intentionality is how your thoughts and feelings are about things in the world. So when you have, say, the thought of the moon, for example, So think about the moon. What you're thinking about is that big rock in space that's floating around that we see all the time. So you know that the intentionality of your mental state, the moon, say an image that you can bring to your mind of the moon, is actually about that thing over there. So let's say I had a painting of the moon. This illustrates the point further. Let's say I had a painting of the moon. Okay, it's a painting that looks just like the moon. My only way of knowing that that painting of the moon, is connected to the big floating rock in space is by having a mind to make that connection, make that interpretation. And that's what it means to have intentionality. So if you're writing an essay, you're writing an essay on dualism or whatever, you know what your essay is about. You've written it and you know what it's about. You know what it's connected to in terms of the ideas that you're presenting in the paper. But then if you get an AI, ChatGPT, to write it for you, because you can't bother writing it, does that ChatGPT really know what it's talking about? It's just done the same thing you have. It's just done some research on the topic and it's written it itself. No one else has written it for it. It's done it itself. But does it have intentionality? Does it actually know what it's talking about, short of just putting those words down in the right order? That's the crux of what intentionality is. So there's three approaches that we're going to be looking at in Metaphysics of Mind, or there's two that we're going to be looking at in Metaphysics of Mind, but there are three in total. Physicalism, dualism, and idealism. I'm going to take each in turn. So physicalism is the view that there is only physical stuff in the universe and everything can be explained in terms of physics or physical explanations. So it's to say that all mental properties, all mental states can be reduced to physical properties or physical states. Reduced means that they can be explained by or broken down to just physical stuff. So everything that we can call consciousness or mental states or whatever, that can be fully explained according to physicalism by just physical descriptions or physical facts, or resorting to physical states, such as the brain and little things that are going on in the brain, like electrical events or communications of neurons or electrons or whatever. So it's basically to say that mental states are just physical states. There's no such thing as mental states according to physicalism that is anything other than just a physical thing. Dualism is in the name. It states that there are two types of things in the world. There are minds and matter, or there are mental states and physical states. So we're going to look at two types of dualism. But in essence, what dualism is saying is mental states seem to have non-physical properties. And therefore, mental states are not the same as physical states. Or in other words, mental states cannot be reduced to, are irreducible to physical states. So then, therefore, there must be both mind and matter, or mental states and physical states. So idealism is one of the other views of mind that we're not going to be touching on in this topic, but I'll just quickly go through it. So it's just to say that actually there is nothing physical. So it's like the antithesis to physicalism. That actually everything is mental. We can only know of mental states. We're only really certain of our own consciousness. And therefore we cannot know of anything other than our own consciousness, which is a mental entity. Physical stuff out there is just the appearance of your own consciousness. It's just some manifestation of your own consciousness or consciousness within the world. And therefore there is nothing physical. There is only mental stuff in the world, mental states. So you could see this as some kind of like cosmic consciousness, of which you are one part of that cosmic consciousness, one individual conscious entity within a mass conscious universe, or something like simulation theory or whatever. But we're not going to be looking too much at that. So we're going to quickly go through both types. So substance dualism is the view that there are two substances. There is mind and matter, and mind is irreducible to matter. So there are two different types of substances. Mind is like a soul kind of substance, which is non-physical, and then matter is like your body, this physical thing. And mind and matter are separate. What describes mind? Things like this. So 4 different kinds of things. Mind is thinking. It's unextended, which means it doesn't occupy any space. It's indivisible. You can't actually divide up consciousness, or you can't divide up mind. So think about your consciousness now. We call that the unity of consciousness, the fact that everything is unified into your whole sense of self, all of these different phenomena into one consciousness, and you cannot divide that consciousness up, because doing so would mean you now have two consciousnesses rather than a divided whole. And it's also indeterminate, which means that there is no strict pattern of cause and effect in mind. And you can see that when you have random thoughts come to your head, if you start to try and meditate, what you'll realise is that you can't really control your thinking. It's sort of indeterminate. As much as you try, you just get random thoughts coming to your head and you don't really know where they've come from. You can't really map out a strict cause and effect there. Well, that's the idea. Conversely, matter is the antithesis, so it's unthinking. It's just sort of dead stuff that doesn't think. It's extended, which means it occupies some kind of space. So it's extended in space, it occupies space. It's divisible. You can chop up physical stuff, matter. And it's determinate. It follows a strict pattern of cause and effect. So that's how matter is, and we can see how that is completely the opposite to mind. And that is one of the key arguments to substance dualism, is to look at the nature of mind and matter and see that they are completely separate. So there's two arguments we're going to look at from Descartes. So the divisibility argument goes as follows. Premise 1, the mind is indivisible, as we've just seen and talked about. Premise 2, the body is divisible. Premise 3, now this is the important bit actually to make this argument a bit more sophisticated. You've got to talk about Leibniz law. So premise 3, according to Leibniz law, if two things, A and B, do not share all of the same properties, then A and B are distinct. That's basically just a very simple version of Leibniz law, at least for our purposes. So if two things A and B are not the same, or don't share all the same properties, which mind and matter don't seem to do, then they're not the same thing. P4, premise 4, mind does not share all the same properties of matter. Therefore, conclusion, mind is distinct from matter, or irreducible to matter, whichever one you want to say. The conceivability argument, which is our second one, states this. Premise 1. We're going back to Descartes' idea of clear and distinct, clearness and distinctness. If I can clearly and distinctly conceive of two things being separate, then I can metaphysically separate them. Remember, we're not really necessarily interested in what's physically possible here, but what's metaphysically possible. So we can metaphysically separate them. You might be thinking you can't surely separate consciousness from a brain because it just wouldn't be there. Well, maybe that's what physics would say, but we're interested in metaphysics here. Premise 2, I can clearly and distinctly conceive of my mind being separate from my body. My mind has these types of properties, A properties, and my body has these other types of properties, B properties. Therefore, it is metaphysically possible to separate mind and body. So it's kind of a similar argument, but more to do with how we can conceive of things. So a big problem with this, this Descartes' argument, is it potentially commits a masked man fallacy. So it's a logical fallacy called the masked man fallacy. And the masked man fallacy, in simple form, is just to say, just because two things seem or appear differently to you doesn't mean that they actually are different. So an example of this is if Batman walked into the room, you saw Batman, you're like, great, Batman. Batman walks out, and then 5 minutes later, Bruce Wayne walks in the room, you're like, oh, it's Bruce Wayne, brilliant. And then Bruce Wayne walks out, and then you said to me, did you know that them two are actually the same thing? And then I say, no, they're not. Of course they're not the same. That's Batman, that's Bruce Wayne. They look exactly, they seem completely different things. Then you could go, oh, no, that's the masked man fallacy. Just because they appear different doesn't mean they are different. In fact, Bruce Wayne is Batman. So that's kind of an example of that. A second issue is to say, well, it's not actually conceivable to separate mind from body. So a physicalist would say it's not even conceivable to separate mind from body. All of these physical things that are going on in your body, in your brain, etc., that implies mind, because that is the mind, all of these things going on. All of my behavior is just my mind. So it's not actually conceivable to separate mind from body. As Dan Dennett would say, separating mind from all of the things that you do, the physical things you do, is like separating health from the functions of your body. So let's say your body is healthy, so it's functioning in all these particular ways. If I said that your body functions in all these particular ways, and that is healthiness, how can you conceive of then separating health from all of those things that it's doing? In the same token, how can you separate consciousness from all of the physical things that are going on, like my behavior and my actions and my expressions and my brain activity? That's the idea. So, looking at property dualism takes a little bit of a different stance. So for property dualism, there is only physical substances in our world, so there's nothing other than physical stuff. So they agree, okay, fine. Maybe there is only physical stuff in our world because we can't really see any conscious substance out there because it's non-physical, so how can we even prove it? So we'll agree that there is only physical stuff in the world. And we'll also agree that your brain is where consciousness is had. That's sort of what a property dualist would say. So one, substance, matter, but two, this is the dualism part, types of properties, mind or mental properties, and physical properties of just physical stuff, okay? So this is also to say that the mind or mental states supervene on physical states. Now what supervene means is that you can have physical stuff in the world without mental stuff, so there could just be the world with just physical stuff, and that's fine, that's acceptable. But you cannot have a world with mental stuff without physical stuff. So mind relies on the physical, so your consciousness, the mental properties, relies on physical stuff, but physical stuff does not rely on mental stuff. So the mind emerges from the physical, is what it's saying. And the reason why it's a dualism theory, or a dualist theory, is because they're saying that ultimately, although there is only physical stuff, you cannot reduce mental properties to just physical states or physical descriptions. That's why it's a bit different to physicalism, because they're saying, well, yes, okay, we can agree that there's just physical substances in the universe, everything's physical in the universe, but of that, you cannot reduce, it's irreducible, to explain mental properties like thoughts and feelings in purely physical terms. So therefore, maybe there has to be two different types of properties, mental properties and physical properties. Mental properties like thoughts and feelings, which are had, of course, in the brain, which is a physical substance. And then there is physical properties, which are things like size and shape and motion, solidity, which can also be in the brain as well. It's physical properties. So that's how that works. So an argument for this comes from Chalmers. Chalmers presented us with the philosophical zombies argument. Now the crux of the argument is to say that it's basically to disprove physicalism and try to prove property dualism. And it states this: premise one, physicalism claims that consciousness is ultimately physical in nature, which is basically the same as saying that consciousness can be fully explained in physical terms. Premise two, it follows that any world which is physically identical to this world must contain consciousness. Because if consciousness is explained in just physical terms, then if anything's physically identical, it will also imply or entail consciousness. Premise three, but we can conceive of a world which is physically identical to this. So let's say there's a world physically identical to this world, and we're all here doing our thing, like talking to each other and laughing and joking and talking about coffee and the taste of coffee and all that business, all physically identical. However, in this world, we're all like unconscious zombies that are just doing stuff, but there's actually nothing going on up there. There's no light bulb. The lights are off. So there's no consciousness. We're just all sort of autonomous, like robots, but like us. Therefore, conclusion one, a zombie world is metaphysically possible. It's metaphysically possible because you can conceive of it. Remember, the only things you can't conceive of are impossible logical contradictions and that kind of thing. Therefore, the ultimate conclusion then is physicalism is false. Why? Physicalism is false according to this argument because if we can conceive of this other world that's physically identical, so it's metaphysically possible, and doesn't have consciousness, then there must be more to the explanation of consciousness than just physical states and physical facts and physical descriptions. Because otherwise, if the other world was physically identical, then consciousness would already be implied, but it seems like it's not, just in the idea of it. So therefore, physicalism must be false. So there must be more to it. Hence property dualism. So some issues then with this argument. Firstly, the zombie world is not conceivable. So some argue that actually this identical physical world with all of us there laughing and joking and having a chat about coffee and stuff, it's not actually conceivable to have this world where we're all doing this stuff without consciousness. Some people think that actually, particularly physicalists, think that the idea of us behaving in this way and doing all the stuff that we're doing, exactly physically identical, doing all these bits, would imply consciousness. Is not conceivable of this world to be the case. A second objection to this argument is to say that just because it's metaphysically possible, right, that this world could exist, doesn't mean that it's actual and doesn't tell us anything about the actual world that we're in now. So there's the second issue. It doesn't help us. A physicalist would still say, yeah, great, you can conceive of that, imagine it, but ultimately in our world, that's all we care about because that's the world we're in, you need physical stuff to have anything conscious, and everything is just explainable in terms of physics, because we just love physics, don't we, in this Western modern world. The second argument for property dualism, the last argument for it, is Mary's room, or the knowledge argument. So the idea of Mary's room is, it's called this person Mary. They're brought up in this black and white room with black and white glasses on, so they never see colour. But Mary is an expert in colour vision. Mary knows all the physical facts of colour vision, all the wavelengths, all the physics explanations of colour, all right, and also all of the biological explanations of how your eye receives light waves and does all of its bits in the brain. She knows everything, all the physical facts about colour. She steps out of her black and white room, that she's been in all her life, that's all she's known, and takes off her black and white glasses, and she gets to see colour for the first time. So when she sees colour for the first time, would she learn something new? Well, Frank Jackson thought, this is his thought experiment, that you would learn something new, i.e. what it's like to see colour. You've learned something new about it. Not just physical facts, but now what it's like to see colour. Therefore, conclusion one, there is more to know about colour vision than just mere physical facts. Therefore, ultimate conclusion there is that physicalism is false, because things like colour vision, what it's like to see red, the qualia of red, cannot be just explained in terms of physical descriptions and physical facts. First issue with this, some people would say that Mary doesn't actually gain any new propositional knowledge, any new factual knowledge about the matter. She only gains acquaintance knowledge. She only just becomes acquainted with colour. So there's no real new knowledge there. Doesn't learn anything new. She just now gets to see firsthand what those physical facts mean in terms of her subjective view of it. So she goes from the objective facts of colour vision to actually having that first-hand understanding by seeing it for the first time. I think maybe there's still something amiss there, but you can have a think for yourself. The second objection comes from Dan Dennett, which would say that if Mary did know all of the physical facts about colour vision, then Mary would also have the knowledge of qualia. If she really knew, because I don't think we would know what that's like to know all the physical facts about colour vision, if she really did, Dan Dennett would say that ultimately she would also have the qualia, be able to bring qualia to the mind of colour vision, such as red. So those are the two objections. Right, very quickly, other issues with dualism, and then that's the topic rounded up in a nutshell. So the first one is the problem of the minds. If there are two different substances or two different properties in the world, mind and matter, mental and the physical, one cannot be reduced to the other, then there could be a problem with other minds. And what that problem is that we cannot see other people's minds. the only things we can actually observe or verify in the world are physical events, physical states, like you and your bodies and everything that's going on here is all physical, and your brains and etc. I can't see your mind. I can't, as it were, go into your head, into your consciousness to see if there's anything there, to see if there's any lights on. And because I can't see that, then how do I even know that any of you have minds? How do I not know, as it were, that it's just me here, just imagining everything in my own mind? So that's a view called solipsism. Solipsism is the idea that there's just you in this world and that nothing else exists, like a dream. When you're in a dream, speaking to someone in your dream, having a chat with someone in your dream, that isn't an actual person. It's just literally a facet of your mind, a figment of your imagination. Solipsism is like that, but in reality. So that's the issue with dualism. Physicalism doesn't have that issue because they just say that everything's physical. So when I look at your physical description, that implies mind. So I don't have that problem with the minds. So a few people have something to say about this, which I'll just very quickly brief over, where they try to avoid this whole problem for the minds issue. Wittgenstein's beetle in the box. So Wittgenstein's beetle in the box is the idea that we all have this beetle in our box, okay? So when we're using language, we'll call it a beetle, all right? So the beetle is everything that we talk about so it's our beetle in our box, okay? We all use that same word to talk about that thing, basically in our conscious minds. We don't know what's in each other's box. In other words, what's in each other's mind when we say beetle. It just always points to that thing in the mind. But for Wittgenstein, it doesn't even matter what's in the mind or what's in our box when we talk about beetle. The only thing that matters is that we all successfully talk about beetles, whatever that thing is. There might even be nothing there. We still all successfully talk about it. And that's the only thing that's really meaningful out there. So therefore, we don't have to worry about this problem with the minds. I think that's just a misuse of language, in essence. Ryle's category mistake, he thinks that asking after the mind makes a category mistake. So imagine it like this. You go to a university and you get shown around the university. You're shown all the different parts of the university. You've got the cafe, campus, the library, the teaching rooms, the offices, etc., etc., etc. Get shown all around the university, and at the end you go, well, where's the university? I was looking for that. And the guide would think you're a bit crazy, or they'd just think you're making a mistake there. That was the university. All of those separate parts together as a whole make the university. And for Ryle, he thinks that's the same with the mind. The mind isn't some separate thing, this consciousness that we need to ask after. The mind is just all the things that we do, all the little neurons firing in the brain and all the behaviours that we do and all the thoughts we express. That is the mind. It's not some separate thing from all of those parts. The argument from analogy is to say, well, we must have other minds because you're all like me. You act like me, behave like me, can talk like me, you've got brains and bodies like me. Everything's just like me, therefore you must also have consciousness like me, even though I can't see it. That's the argument from analogy. And then the last one is just to say, look, we've got two options here. Either there are other minds in you all, or there are no other minds within you all, just my mind. Most common sense option, inference to the best explanation, is just to say that you all must have other minds. Because there's no clear evidence either way. There's no more evidence to say that you have minds than there is to say that you don't. So you may as well just go with the idea that you do have minds. That's all right, Fizzer. Just rocking halfway through. Okay, so we're nearly at the end now. The interaction problem, this is the last kind of problem that we're going to look at, is if mind is this non-physical thing, right? So mind is this non-physical thing that does stuff to the body. For example, when I think to myself, I need a coffee, that's a thought, which is a mental state, non-physical mental state. That seems to cause me and my body to go and get coffee and drink it. So there seems to be a causal chain of events from my thought of coffee and wanting coffee and desire to have coffee to me going and getting it in a physical way. The interaction problem is, how do you explain how something non-physical can cause or interact with the physical? It's like Casper the ghost coming through and wanting to shake my hand or do something to me. It seems like if it's this soul-like non-physical thing, it wouldn't be able to do that, just swish through my body. It's kind of the same as saying that about the mind. If the mind is this non-physical substance, how does that do anything? Descartes thought that it happens in the pineal gland, but that doesn't really help us understand the matter, because that's still a physical thing. And from that you have a bit more of a sophisticated problem here, which is the empirical interaction problem. This comes from the world of physics. So the world of physics would say that the physical universe, or they've proved that the physical universe is a closed system. That means, premise 2, in any closed system, energy must be conserved. It cannot be added or taken away. It's just changed. So we've got all this massive energy, doesn't get lower, doesn't get higher. It just changes within the system. Premise 3, mind and body, according to dualism, causally interact. Premise 4, but causation involves the transfer of energy. And if we only see that there is physical energy, then that means mind must be adding some kind of mental energy, which we cannot observe. Therefore, the mind must be physical, because we only see physical energy transferring. There isn't any mental energy that we can observe coming into the mix, adding energy in or taking energy away. So that's the empirical interaction problem. And you can have some other thoughts around that, around whether you think that's a valid option. Some people think that maybe the mind is more like a person in a car steering it. I don't add any energy to the car. When I'm getting it to go, I'm just steering it in the right direction. Some people think that that's what the mind does to the body. But even then, a physicist will say that still implies transfer of energy. Right, which comes to our last bit of dualism. And it's a response to the interaction problem, which is called epiphenomenolism. Epiphenomenolism meaning just like one way causation from the physical to the mental, but not mental back to the physical. So it looks like this. The brain will do its thing, okay? It does all of its causing, all of its physical causing, conserves the energy within its system, gets you to go and do coffee, gets you to go and get coffee and all that stuff. Okay, the brain does everything in this causal loop. And from that, you have this kind of one-way phenomena where you get to observe everything that's going on. But that doesn't mean that your thought, which is a mental thing, I want coffee, actually does anything, doesn't cause anything. That's just an illusion. In fact, the causation that happens is just in the brain, just in the physical events of the brain. The mind is just this kind of byproduct of your brain doing its thing. It's just you basically sitting there observing everything that's going on, thinking that you play a role in it, but actually you don't. You're just there to be the observer. That's the idea of epiphenomenalism. It's got some problems. First of all, what would be the evolutionary point of you having mental states and consciousness if it doesn't play a role in anything to do with your life? It seems odd from an evolutionary perspective, to say that there are mental states that are there but don't do anything. So that's the first issue. The response there is to say there are other things that have byproducts. It's a bit of a terrible response, I won't go through it. The second issue is that it creates a bigger problem for other minds. So we want to say that you all have minds, but now we're saying that your minds don't have any causation over what you do. So I can't even argue from analogy that you behave like me and that must be because, or must have been caused by the fact that you had mental states like mine. Can't even say that anymore. But again, there's a reply to that, which is to say, well, at least you're still physically like me, so you must still, from the argument from analogy, have a mind like me too, even if it is an epiphenomenal mind that doesn't do any causing. So that's that. So there you go, dualism in a nutshell. Plenty of things there, but also plenty of things missed, but good for revision. That's that. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Fizzer.